There's a reason some wartime secrets don't make it into textbooks. Not because they weren't important, but because they were just too effective, too practical, and sometimes, honestly, a bit too inconvenient for the narrative that came after. Today, we're digging into one of those overlooked survival tools, a simple, dense, nutrient-packed bread that helped civilians and soldiers stretch rations, stay alive longer, and maintain strength when food systems collapsed. This wasn't luxury food. It was survival science disguised as bread. And once you understand it, you'll start looking at modern food very differently. So, let's get straight into it. This bread was engineered for survival, not taste or comfort. During World War II, many countries faced severe shortages of refined wheat, sugar, and fats. Governments had to rethink food from the ground up. What emerged in several regions, especially across parts of Europe, was a type of bread made from whole grains, root vegetables like potatoes, and sometimes even sawdust-adjacent fillers like bran or husk fibre. It sounds a bit extreme, but there was a method behind it. This bread was intentionally dense, dark, and slow to digest. Unlike white bread, which spikes energy and then drops it, this version released energy gradually. That meant fewer hunger crashes, better endurance, and less dependence on frequent meals. In survival terms, that's absolutely critical. When food is scarce, the goal is not just to eat, it's to stay functional for longer with less. You can apply this today by shifting away from ultra-refined foods. If you're building a survival pantry, focus on whole grain flours like rye, barley, or even sorghum. Mix in mashed potatoes or oats to create a denser loaf. The goal isn't fluff, it's fuel. It quietly prevented malnutrition when vitamins were scarce. One of the biggest hidden dangers during wartime wasn't starvation. It was nutrient deficiency. Refined flour strips away essential vitamins like B-complex, iron, and fibre. That's why wartime bread often included the entire grain, sometimes even with added vegetable matter. This wasn't accidental. Nutritionists at the time understood that keeping populations alive meant preventing long-term weakness, not just filling stomachs. That bread delivered micronutrients that helped prevent fatigue, immune collapse, and even mental decline under stress. If you're serious about survival preparedness, this is a lesson most people miss. Calories alone won't keep you going. A practical step is to store ingredients that naturally carry nutrients: whole grains, dried legumes, and root vegetables. Even something as simple as adding grated carrots or sweet potatoes into your bread can boost both nutrition and shelf life. Governments promoted it heavily during the war, then abandoned it after. Here's where things get interesting. During the Second World War, governments actively encouraged people to eat this kind of bread. Campaigns pushed national loaves made from mixed grains to reduce reliance on imported wheat. People adapted because they had no choice. But after the war ended, something changed. White bread made a massive comeback. It became a symbol of prosperity, modernity, and success. Dense, dark bread was suddenly seen as poor people's food, something tied to hardship and struggle. The knowledge didn't disappear, it was simply pushed aside. Industrial food systems favoured refined grains because they lasted longer on shelves and appealed more to consumers. Over time, people forgot why the wartime version existed in the first place. For you, the takeaway is simple. Don't let comfort erase efficiency. Just because something is less appealing doesn't mean it's less valuable. In fact, in survival situations, it's often the opposite. Its long shelf life made it ideal for crisis situations. Another overlooked advantage of this bread was durability. Because it was dense and low in moisture compared to soft white bread, it didn't spoil as quickly. Some versions could last several days, even weeks, if stored properly. This mattered in a time when refrigeration was limited or non-existent. Families needed food that could sit, travel, and still be edible when needed. You can replicate this by baking heavier loaves and storing them in cool, dry conditions. Even better, slice and dry them into hard rations similar to rusks. That way you extend usability without relying on electricity. In a real crisis, that's a game changer. It trained people to think differently about food and survival. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from this Second World War bread isn't the recipe. It's the mindset. People were forced to adapt, to accept less comfort in exchange for resilience. They learned to stretch ingredients, to waste nothing, and to prioritize function over preference. That mindset is what saved lives. Today, many people rely entirely on convenience systems, supermarkets, delivery apps, processed foods, but those systems are fragile. One disruption and access disappears. The people who understand how to create sustaining food from basic ingredients will always have the advantage. Start small. Try baking your own survival-style bread once a week. Experiment with different grains. Reduce reliance on sugar and refined flour. Learn what actually keeps you full and energized. These are not just cooking skills, they're survival skills. Why this knowledge still matters more than ever. We're living in a time where food supply chains are more complex and more vulnerable than ever before. Climate shifts, economic instability, and global conflicts all impact access to basic nutrition. The lessons from the Second World War aren't outdated, they're becoming relevant again. That bread wasn't glamorous. It wasn't something people bragged about. But it worked. It kept people going when everything else failed. And that's exactly the kind of knowledge worth holding on to. If you're serious about survival, history has already done half the work for you. All you have to do is pay attention to what worked and bring it back. Subscribe to Endgame Survival for more real, practical history like this, and share this with someone who needs to start thinking differently about survival before it's too late.